Welcome to our webinar. My name is Nela Furejtová and I'm the head of online education here at ISP. I also have my colleague, co-host Jeff Fisher with me today.
Hello.
Jeff, say hi. Yeah, sorry. So Jeff will be helping us with the chat and the Q&A box, and I'm going to talk about it shortly. So I can still see people popping in. That's great. So welcome everybody. We have our webinar today focused on analyzing the potential of consulting projects. We have great panelists, which I will introduce shortly. I also have my colleague Jeff Fisher, as I mentioned before, and he'll be helping me running this webinar. For now, we had a little warm-up exercise. People are rating us where they're from. So if you didn't, please do so. Meanwhile, I'm going to start. So in terms of some housekeeping rules, since this is a Zoom webinar, you are automatically muted and your video is not available. So please, if you have any question that will be to our panelists or for me, in terms of our consulting projects, please use the Q&A box. You can also raise your hand and Jeff will be watching out for that. We can then unmute you and you can actually ask your question live if you prefer that. Also, if you have any technical difficulties or some sort of administrative questions, please use the chat for that. And also Jeff will be watching out and will try to help you. For sure. And then I just need to mention that this session will be recorded and we will also share it with you afterwards. So these were the housekeeping rules. So now we can get into the introduction of our speakers, our panelists, and also to introduce this session. So let me start with why are we here? The topic is to analyze the potential of consulting projects. And the idea is that we will actually look at a specific project that we've done with a Prague-based company and students, executive MBA students from the University of Tampa help solve their challenge. We'll tell you a little bit more about that shortly, but let me first introduce Amy Harris. She's the Director of Graduate Programs and Associate Professor of Management at the University of Tampa. Welcome, Amy. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Nella. Hi, everybody.
Awesome. And then we have Marek Šoltys. He's the CEO of Riden Technologies, which is an investment company and startup incubator, and also CEO of Redcap Solutions. Welcome, Marek. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, everybody.
Perfect. And before we go any further, we actually have a poll question. We have two poll questions, which we want to ask our audience. So Jeffy, I'm going to ask you if you can share the poll. Okay, here it is. And our lovely audience, we have two questions. First one, do you have any previous experience with consulting projects? So just let us know if you stumbled upon it in the past or not. And the second one, that digs a little bit deeper, especially if you've done the consulting project. To what extent do you think a consulting project can improve students' future employability? So I can see people voting. That's perfect. 15, 16 already voted. 10 more. Okay. Okay, a few more seconds. Okay. Perfect. Jeffy, I think you can end the polling and let's share the results. Okay, so majority have the experience with consulting project. Great, so we know what kind of crowd we have here. Perfect. And majority believes that it will greatly help the students with their employability. Well, we're very happy to hear that, obviously. So that's amazing. That's very good to know. Perfect. So these were the poll questions. And now let's dig deeper, continue with our conversation. So I will actually start with a question for Amy. And Amy, if you can introduce us the Executive MBA program a little bit more, just for the audience.
Okay, sure. I think like most EMBA programs, it's a cohort model. We're about 21 months. Average age of our students is probably 40-ish, so give or take. And the average number of years of experience is about 16 years of experience. So in context of the consulting projects, they come at the end of our program. In fact, we spend an entire semester just all projects all the time. It's part of a strategic management course that comes at the end of the program.
Perfect, perfect. And how long have you worked with your students on consulting projects?
We are coming up on our 9th or 10th year of doing the projects.
Okay, and why? Where do you see the value?
You know, I think the main thing is that it really helps students tie everything together in a really meaningful way. So it's not a case, it's not, you know, something that they've read. It's like a real thing. They have to be accountable to somebody. And I think that it's just a very dynamic learning environment for them, and it helps them apply what they learn. So, you know, it gives them a lot of confidence. They have to think on their feet. There's just so many pluses to it. I feel like if you go on a trip and you're just visiting different businesses, of course, there's a lot of value in that. But when you are personally responsible for it, there's a lot more value. Like they have a lot more skin in the game, and they're a lot more focused on their projects, and the trip is just a lot more meaningful.
That's perfect. And when you work in with the company, so obviously you have a specific idea or some sort of an idea of what kind of company would make a good consultancy project. So when you look at that on that right company, what is your criteria?
Well, you know, you don't want a company that's so large. We've done big companies before, and they don't need you, honestly. You're like a burden to them. They don't have the time. And they have a whole staff that does what your students are doing. So it doesn't really make that much sense. On the other hand, you don't want it too small. And again, actually, when we did our project for Marek, he was fairly small, but it was complicated enough that they could really dive in and dig into it. So the problem, you know, I say I don't want it too small, but the issue is that, is there enough for them to analyze, right? Is there some complexity, something that they have to struggle with? Because you know, you want to keep them engaged. You want them to know. And I think the biggest thing for me, you know, not really the size, is just their commitment to wanting to give you the time, right? Because the projects are only as good as the amount of information that the students have. So if they don't have good information, they're not going to do a good project. They're not going to be satisfied. The company's not going to be satisfied, and the students aren't going to be satisfied. So there has to be a working relationship there. And I say, you know, we're not moving into your company. You don't have to donate. You know, it's not a, we're not going to bother you every day. I mean, we pick a contact person who is the liaison with the company, and we try to formalize the process. But they do have to be interested in it and invested in it, and also give the students access, because you're not going to have a good project if they can just talk to one person, right? Because one person's perspective is one person's perspective. So they need to be able to talk to multiple people within the company. So I think it's just an involvement, really. It's to be able to engage, you know, how pressing is this for the students? So, I mean, the best projects are when the company is like, yeah, I want your help. I value your input. And the students know that, and they feel like that they're working for somebody, and they have a reason why they're doing what they're doing.
No, you're absolutely right. And maybe for the audience, we've worked together, Amy and me, for the past 3 years. Was it the past 3 years on the project?
You know, it's probably been more than that, but you know, at least 3 years. And I will say too, for people who are looking at the projects, is that, you know, Nella's a fantastic partner in general, but when you are on the ground, it's so helpful. Nella always travels with us. It's so helpful to have somebody from ISP with your project, because things change. And if you just have somebody who's local, who's on the ground, who wasn't involved in the project, wasn't involved in developing, and doesn't really understand what you're trying to accomplish, it's much harder for them to be responsive. And a lot of times, you know, you pivot and you're like, oh, this, we need to do this, or we want to, you know, at the end of we spend about 3.5 days, or at least 3 days with the clients when we're traveling. And at the end of it, we have an event. So we have a luncheon or a dinner or something. And, you know, there's just all kinds of things that come up, you know, transportation wise, getting together wise, wrapping things up. And it's just so helpful when you have somebody from ISP who's there on the ground that can be responsive and help you, you know, be flexible and really accomplish what your learning goals are. So, you know, from that perspective, I would say, you know, and the other thing is the longevity, right? We're not recreating the wheel every year. When Nella and I do a project, we know we're starting, she already knows what I'm looking for, what the kind of projects are and what our students are like. And that's tremendously valuable.
That's true. That makes it, even from our side, just so easy, because we have our own timeline that we always update for that particular year. There's the document with the criteria and the expectation that we send to the company. So yeah, it's just much easier. And I feel that we actually learn every year, you know, something new.
Exactly, right? We're not doing that again, or yes, do more of that.
Exactly.
Right? It's a process, right? You know, like everything is, you do have to learn. So
yeah.
But you can't learn if you're a one and done. So
oh, absolutely. And back to the criteria, I also had a thought that that I think you came up with that maybe two years ago, maybe it was even earlier. But to make sure that the company is really established and they're running for at least, let's say, 3 years. So there's some sort of a operation run, and that's connected to the enough data. And I think a lot of the times, you know, working with a startup, especially now, especially for the executive MBA cohort, I think it still could be done with a different level. And when it's a less comprehensive project, so more like a flash consulting, then I think startups are perfect. But if it's executive MBAs and they really need to do the industry analysis and everything prior, and sometimes they do almost like a strategic reframe work or something like that, then it needs the data. Yeah.
Oh yeah, they get tremendously anxious if they don't have some financial analysis that they can do, because this is what they really are, you know, they really want to be able to do something. And if they're just working for pro formas, it's okay. I mean, we've improvised before, obviously, but they really like it. There's so much, just having, like you say, data. They need to be able to look at something to get a feeling for it.
And it makes the outcome better, right? That's important. Have an in-depth analysis, and then the recommendations are way more spot on than it would be just outcome of a brainstorming session with them.
Yeah, right. They want something tangible, that's concrete, that's implementable, that they can really offer something that's, you know, not just, you know, well, you might try this or something, but no, they really want to make sure that it's data-driven recommendations that they're making.
Perfect. Thank you, Amy. I'm gonna now actually ask Marek if he could introduce to us the challenge that he gave to the executive MBA cohort last year.
Yeah, we have been in touch with you, and you proposed us the consulting project in the time when we decided to move also or expand to U.S. market at the time. For all the attendees, we are working on some high resolution video compression devices, which are really good for the video transfer and also video production and movie production. And we were present at the time just in Europe. And we struggled for more than a year to expand to US market. And we didn't understand why we are not successful at the time. And what is the difference in the approach to the US market in comparison with the Europe? That was our challenge that time.
And so what was your expectation at that time, how the outcome would look like? What was your hope?
Yeah, I just want to touch the Amy's comments that we had also doubts as the other companies. That's what you can expect from the students, from the different kind of their professions, and the expectation we were more curious than we had a high expectations, but we're glad that we made the decision that time.
Perfect, perfect. Well, sometimes it's also that different perspective, right? Just put that little spice in it. It's out of the box thinking. It's somebody that is not in the company that just can help you maybe raise the questions, right?
Exactly, exactly. It was difficult in the beginning when people tried to just get in the problem, they understand the environment. That was more difficult part. But in the end, as you said, yeah, the different approaches, different views, different experiences made it very colorful. And as I said, I'm glad we did it.
Perfect. And so can you tell us a little bit more about the actual result and if it had any sort of impact on the business or what it meant for the business? Now it's a year later, so it's also great to evaluate how useful it was.
Now, what to say? Now we are present in Los Angeles and Atlanta. That maybe this is the answer. I don't think that the consulting project is just only one thing which we did it, but it helped us a lot because now we understood that U.S. customers are more focused on the value of the business value of the product. And we came to U.S. market before just on the technical level, that we are best in the technology, we are really good in certain device parameters, technical parameters. And people always said, yes, that it's quite interesting, but they didn't expect to implement it. But together with Amy and their team, we worked more on the business values. We just forgot for little moments that what is the technical strengths, and we start from the customer perspective. And in Europe, people understand the technical values, that they understand, they can imagine how to implement it. But in the US, we got, they don't care. Yeah, it's great to have a top technology, but if there's no business value, if there's no value for me as a customer, I just listen it as a nice toy, but I don't expect to really integrate it. And we work with the team long term. As Amy said, they approach us from many ways, from the technical way, from the business way. They talk to many our technical managers, product managers, financial managers, and we've made together the project as a joint approach to U.S. market. And I think in the end it helps. And the result is now we have two partners. One is in Georgia, one is in California. We're glad for that. Now we understand. We have a common language at the time, as I can say. We don't talk too much about the technical features. We talk in business values.
Wow. Well, that's amazing, and a great result on the Los Angeles and Georgia or Atlanta. So that's perfect. Would you say, is there something that stands out for you in terms of the overall experience when working with, the American students?
Yeah, to be honest, I didn't expect such a professional approach. That I expect as a student, nice questions, very deep dive in the problem, but the outputs were really professionals. I can compare it with real professional consulting companies, and in some moments I can say it's more deeper and more professional than the consulting companies, because what I have experienced from my previous business age, that the consulting companies, they just copy and refresh their knowledge, but these guys have to learn it from the scratch, because they didn't know they didn't understand our business before. They have a really tough questions in the beginning. As I said, the find the way to each other was more difficult part, but the output is really professional, and I'm really surprised with the quality and with the real depth of the consulting report.
Wonderful. So then, just last question. Would you do it again?
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, as I said, in previous time we had a lot of doubt when I came to the company too. Well, let's hire the students for the consulting projects. My colleagues look at me like, really? We don't have enough time to just to waste it to teach someone. But in the end, we found out that they teach us.
Wonderful. I'm just going to stop here.
We'll do it again.
That's perfect. And I'm very happy to hear that. We have you on our list and database. So we'll reach out. Let me just stop for a little bit because maybe I see some questions popping in. I'm just going to check in with Jeffy. Do we have some questions?
We do, yes. Actually, so one, do you mind if I just ask it, Nelly? Is that all right?
Yes, go ahead. Thank you.
So one person asked us, we're talking about, working with companies and a lot of the students that you work with, and I guess it's really a question for Amy. The students that you work with, if they're executive students, obviously they're most likely working probably full-time on their own. Have you seen where there's a conflict of interest, either from their own organizations that they're employed by, and some of the projects that they're trying to work on? Have you seen any issues with conflict of interest, or how have you handled that if it has come up?
Well, I try to avoid that by pre-screening. So, a lot of times faculty not sure, do I assign students to a group or do I let them pick the ones they're interested in? And it's a mix, right? Because you want to put somebody, like with Marek's, there was a specific technical background they needed to know. They needed to have some context for it, right? You couldn't take somebody who had never even thought about this topic and put them in and say, hey, all right, here's your project. So you want them to have some background, but you don't want them to have so much that it would be the conflict. So it's a pre-screening issue for me. I assign groups. I try to figure out, well, what are their skill sets? And it's tricky because you think you know what the project's going to be about, and a lot of times it's not that at all. So, it's a little tricky. But I haven't had that issue, but I pre-screen, and if I know somebody, I talk to them before I do assignments, and I try to not have that, to avoid that.
Thank you. Another question that came up is, have you seen, or what have you seen as some of the long-term benefits for the university, so in your case for Tampa, of partnering with companies on projects?
It's interesting because, it is executive MBAs, and most of them are employed in more corporate type positions, I guess I would say. But I had, like, for example, one of our groups, we were in Switzerland, and we did a project for a very large grocery chain there. And our students, after the project ended, they had worked on this project. They had a startup, which in Florida, we have a lot of agriculture, and they were this flash freezing technology that they came up with it. And their biggest client ended up being their client that they did their EMBA consulting project for.
Wow.
So there is some, a lot of, because you work so closely with people, a lot of times there are relationships. I know, like when we were working in Prague, right? And we did the high-end bike company, right? And they would get up and go bike riding with the CEO of the bike company when they were there. So they form personal relationships other than just the professional ones. So I think, I think that there is some long-term benefit for people.
It's true. It's almost like a deeper networking, right? So it's not just to exchange a business card, but you actually got to know them a little bit. I know that a lot of the company representatives took the students maybe in the evening for, a drink, or we had that in Prague where they took them on a little ride on the countryside, which is
students still talk about that. It was like Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. Yes, they went out and they were like, does he keep his eyes on the road at all? He was answering his phone and driving, and they were on this mountainside sort of, and yeah.
It was a cultural experience as well, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's true. Okay, thank you. JP, is there any other question?
Maybe, yeah, just one more in a little bit of a different context, basically. But there was a question about the credits that students get for a consulting project. So again, Amy, if you can maybe just talk to that from your experience and
part
what
of our
you do in terms of
strategic management. And I used to just do it in one 4-hour class, and then they take another class at the same time. But I felt like it distracted them, and so I reformulated the program, so it's 8 hours of their program. It's a 40-hour program, so 8 hours, and it's the last semester. And it is the projects, but it's it's the skills you learn in strategic management, right? So industry analysis and company analysis and making recommendations, and so they have to they do, everything they do is set up to apply it to the projects, but there's, you know, a lot of learning that has to happen before the projects, you know, to make the projects a reality. So it's all tied up into one, it's a 1 8-hour class.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. So let's get back to our the project, because I still have at least one question, and that's for Amy. If you spoke to the students, or you know how the experience was for the students when working on the Redcap Solutions project.
Well, I think it's well, I was going to say it's twofold, but it's probably much more multidimensional than that. But you know, you do get the cultural aspect of, you form relationships, because it's not like you go in for a business visit and it's for an hour or 2 hours and then you leave, right? You actually, you know, and part of the, before they take this, we have a it's a intercultural competencies module that they have to do. And so, you know, everybody thinks that they're pretty international, but probably none of us really are. So, you know, it's really challenging their assumptions of, well, how do we communicate? What is the culture? What is that? So there's that piece of it in terms of backing up. You know, you don't really know as much as you do. You think you do, and the world doesn't operate the way you think it does. So there's that piece of it that's big. But I also think it's just, you know, they learn to think on their feet, and it's the confidence. So, you know, for example, Nella, we've done projects in Prague where students went in thinking it was one project. They got into the project and they realized, you know what, that is not your issue at all. This is not what you need to be focusing on. As a result of this, of our deep dive into your company, we see some things you need to address before you can even consider doing what you're thinking, right? So there is that thinking on your feet piece and a confidence piece that it really, you know, and also, you know, I don't think sometimes when students are going through a program, they don't say, well, when am I ever going to use that? Right? Like, why would I need that? You know, like, you know, you get a lot of pushback in like stats or something. It's like, oh, this is torture. Why are we doing this? And then they do the project and they're like, I needed that because I needed to be able to answer this question, and I needed to be able to use those analytical skills. So it helps them realize, well, the value of everything that they did. It might be marketing, it might be management, it might be a supply chain, it might be, you know, who knows what the issue is, but they feel like, I see why I learned that, and I see how it applies, and I see that even if that wasn't the question, I see the application, even though that wasn't what your initial ask was, right? So to be able to do that. So I think it really, you know, maybe, and it's not like to say that I want to end up the project with, oh, this is a confidence building class, but it is, you know, it just makes them, realize it's a very nice way for them to leave the project, you know, to leave the program.
Thank you, Amy. I'm actually going to follow up on what you just said, and also for the audience, because with Amy, we do a certain format of the consulting projects, but there are different formats as well. And so in the past, or we still do, we can either have an assignment with the company. So basically, let me start from the beginning how it works. So we do have get the criteria from the professor, understand the need, what is the objective. Sometimes there are specific ideas on the industry. There might be ideas on the size of the company, or their target audience, or what they do. It really can range from the criteria. So that's important to understand. And at ISP, we need to understand that. So we know, you know, where we're looking. So that's definitely important. And then usually after that, when we go and secure the project, I know what works really well for me, and that's what we do with Amy, is that once I get something, I almost immediately, I need to know the challenge that the company would present. So I already dig deeper into them. And if they have the idea, I go with that to Amy, and almost immediately, you know, let's have a call. And this one is important because for us, it's like a check for Amy to see if it actually matches, you know, if it is a good challenge for the group, if it makes sense. Maybe it's too deep, maybe it's actually not deep enough. Maybe it's too complex, or it is all over the place, or there's not enough data. And we use it almost like a filter. So at that point, we can still say, okay, you know what, let's not go with this one, we'll go with another one. So that's important, this milestone. But then once we have put together the assignment, then obviously the assignment is introduced to the students and the teams, and then there's an introductory call between the company representatives and the team, and then they usually work on the more like the industry analysis. So they really try to understand the industry first, and then the company themselves. And I really like this format because when they get on the ground, it is really very much about the project scope. So, and that's what Amy was talking about, that when they get there and they have the first face-to-face discussions, maybe they see the company, they interact with other employees as well, and they sometimes really only then fully understand what the challenge actually it is, and they get the idea of, oh, okay, this is how we're gonna approach it. And it's like a good check-in point with the company as well, because it's like a milestone. Okay, so this is what you want from us, get that agreement. It's a validation phase of some sort as well. They actually present not any final outcomes, which is in a different format, but actually the project scope. So when they leave, they know what they need to work on, they do that, and then they just do the final delivery, let's say, I think like a month after, a month and a half, what they present through Zoom, the final outcomes, and send the report as well. And I personally have to say that this format I love. I think it's a great one. It really diminishes any errors, in that work, diminishes any waste of time, on either side. So it's perfect. But there is another format which some of the universities use, and that's when they are on the ground, they actually do the final presentation. So they use that time to do the final presentation of the outcome and get the feedback from the company. Sometimes it works. Sometimes I feel like that the feedback is actually so that they're not happy. The company is actually not happy. It felt like they deviated, but maybe there was a misunderstanding or not clear communication, or really just the expectations were not aligned. That's why I love the Amy's format. I'm calling it Amy's format.
Yes.
It has a name. It's gonna be our terminology now, Amy's format. So this one's I think even better. And then I do just want to mention a third one, which we briefly mentioned, and that's the flash consulting. I find that one quite interesting, especially because it's interactive. It can be during the program, ideally for one day. That's absolutely enough. And so they spend one day with a company. In the morning, they get information about the company. So what do they do and everything. They present a challenge. Then the students have only a few hours to work on that challenge, and then they present their ideas, their recommendations, and get a feedback. I think this one is good also, as I mentioned, with startups or really starting companies at that stage, and they just want to get something, some sort of a quick action plan on a certain topic. So that one works really well too. Okay. That's Amy?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, no problem. It happens to all of us. That's Zoom, right? We are in everybody's living rooms.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So maybe just quick question for Jiffy. Do we have any questions, or should we move on?
Nope, all good for now. I have a couple that I'll hold on to, so we can move to the next section.
Okay, perfect. So now actually I wanted to talk a little bit more about changing this consulting project to a purely virtual format. So as you can see, the consulting projects are already partially virtual. The students get connected to the company. Sometimes they even present the final outcomes via Zoom or other platform. But in the past, we always had that part which was on the ground. So when they were on the ground for their study trip for, let's say, 1 week, they did spend something between 2-3 days with the company representatives and really physically went to the offices, maybe even the production facilities or the showrooms, and talked to different employees as well. And now, obviously, the situation is different, and we do want to talk about the purely, virtual consulting projects and where we see a benefit and where it might be a bit challenging as well. So let me start first. I do have to point out that really majority is already virtual. So just the on the ground part, I do feel like that the pro or the plus in that is the flexibility, to be honest, because sometimes securing the face-to-face meetings with the companies when they couldn't, at least I had that experience, that they couldn't dedicate full 4 hours or really 8 hours with the company. We sometimes stumbled upon this challenge. So I feel like that if it's purely virtual, it can be maybe split into shorter sessions, just 1 hour check-ins, here and there. It could be even every day, but just 1 hour check-in with the company if they're on the right path, and then let's go and still do the work that the team needs to do. So that might be a bit easier, or reach out to a different employee, but for them to really, maybe they just have a half an hour window. Well, perfect. In the virtual format, it's a bit easier to connect with them. So that one, I see a bit of a benefit too. And when it comes to maybe the final delivery or the project scope delivery, whatever was on the ground, if it's via Zoom, maybe it might be easier for other students, the other teams to join in as well and listen and learn, from that experience as well. Or maybe other people from the company, other employees, that might be a little helpful, because we always booked conference rooms, or we were in some sort of venue which could have been limiting, or sometimes a bit of a struggle in terms of the commute to the conference room. So joining via Zoom might be a little bit better. I do have to point out though that it definitely, the on the ground experience has something to do it. And we already mentioned it with Amy a little bit. There is that, face-to-face interaction, the networking, the creating the relationship, which is face-to-face, because they laugh together as well. They share, the sense of humor, and they see the company physically. They might actually understand the company culture a little bit more by just walking, through the halls of the company. So there are definitely, the pros and cons of looking at the pure virtual format. But what doesn't change is the content, and the fact that if the students want to have a hands-on consultancy experience, they can definitely do it. And imagine that they work with a company that is across the world. They would still have to do it virtually. So that doesn't necessarily change as much. And it is still a challenge to do that. So they might as well practice it in this format before they go out there on their own and try to secure some business deals. But so just so I don't talk too much and I'm not too boring, I'm going to ask Amy again, what does she think?
Well, I think you bring up a lot of good points that a little bit's lost in translation sometimes. So I think that a face-to-face, sometimes like people don't know what they don't know. Like they read and the company will give them information and they read it, but then they're like, something's not right. I'm missing something here or whatever. And so when they meet them the first time, I have them do a here's what we've learned so far. And sometimes the students are way off in what the industry niche they were looking at or what their understanding was. So I do think that the face-to-face is valuable just in terms of a reality check for them. Now, having said that, I think COVID has changed everything in terms of how we communicate. I mean, here we are doing a webinar and doing it via Zoom with people from all over, which we wouldn't be able to have this conversation, right, if we weren't doing it virtually. There's people from everywhere. So I think that we've learned to use the virtual, and as you point out, and it's a good one, like 70% or 60% of the projects are already virtual because we're only there for 3 days with them, right? And they spend a lot of time not face to face. So I think that if you were going to do it virtually, you'd have to put place guards in place where you have longer blocks of time that you can actually interact, because I think that a 1 hour chunk is good, but you have to have some time to just, I don't know, just to sort of really dig in, and it gets a lot more messy before it gets clear most of the time, right? And that's the learning, right, that they have to struggle with them. I just throw them in, and and I don't micromanage them at all. It's up to them to figure out how they're going to do it. I mean, they're all quite capable of that. So you know, I don't know. Taking out the face-to-face, probably not my first preference, to be honest. But I don't think it's, you know, given where we are right now, if the alternatives are don't do them or do them virtually, I would say 100% do them virtually, because there is a lot to be gained. And like I said, you can do them. It's just like anything. You can do it. You just have to figure out how you do it, right? So how would you structure it to make sure that there's that honest exchange of information, I think? Because, you know, again, the real value of a face-to-face are the intangible, the nonverbal cues, the culture of the company, the whatever. So how are you going to capture that? I'm not sure, but you could figure out a way to do that. I'm pretty sure.
Right. Awesome. Thank you, Amy.
Yeah.
Now let's ask our audience, what do they think? So Jeff, can I ask you to do our last poll? So how do you feel about a purely virtual consulting project? So let us know. Okay. Good, good. Got a lot of responses. I think we can end the poll. Let's share the results. Okay, so still a lot of people would definitely do it. Great to hear. And a lot of them, I can see the benefits and I'm open to it. Okay, okay, I love this. And we do have maybe 1%. I'm not entirely convinced about the virtual version. Sure. Now we completely understand. And that's what we were saying with Amy even before the webinar started. You know, we want to be honest here. It definitely, we can see the benefits, and we also, with Amy specifically, we enjoy traveling together. So it's always great to, you know, have that experience in a different country, in a different context, trying to solve somebody else's challenge. And it's a great component to actually get there. It's almost like a cherry on top, and, you know, so if it's removed, it sometimes feels like, okay, I'm doing all this work, but I don't get the cherry on top. I totally understand this feeling, but it's great to see that the content is still important. It still brings the value to the students, brings still the same value to the companies as well. And so definitely, even though we have these circumstances, there's no reason why not to do it, right?
I mean, can I just ask you? We had a question about the kind of the virtual approach, basically, and you touched on it a little bit. I know you have you're aiming to have some projects coming up, I believe, in California in the next few months. Can you just talk a little bit about the kind of the format, maybe the timeline that you see now that everything is virtual, basically? So maybe the timeline of the project themselves, and how often you hope the students can kind of connect with the companies, and just your general approach to the virtual side of it from that sense.
Well, actually, so with Amy, we are working now on another set of projects for the 2021, but we're still hoping to do it face to face, to be honest. So yeah, so actually still to be there, and then the timeline is pretty much the same as we had in the past. So we usually have approximately, so when we set it, when we have the criteria, and know what we're going to focus on, there is approximately a month or two to search for the companies, to get the challenges from them, then to connect with Amy. Like now, for example, we're at that stage to get the companies on board, looking at the possible challenges. We're really hoping to have that by Christmas, definitely. And then for Amy to have a look at it, and I think launch it or have that sorting, have the assignment by mid-January, right? So then it can be by the end of January or latest beginning of February, actually introduced to the students and to the team so they can work on it. And then the travel part is in March. And then actually the final delivery in May, right?
Yeah. You know what? And that just made me think about something. I think too, when you know you're going to travel, maybe the students don't work as hard up front because they know when they get there, they can clear it up. When you were talking about the virtual ones, you know what I mean? If they know that this is virtual and I got to talk to them, I got to get started on this right now, and we're only going to be able to communicate virtually, I bet that would be a different dynamic. Because sometimes I feel like that they're really busy and they're like, yeah, I'll sort it out when I get there, kind of thing. So I know that's off topic, but anyway, just made me
Yeah,
think.
that's a good point. That's a good point. And I think maybe in the purely virtual format, it might need a bit of a harsher, push on the milestone check-in.
Yeah.
And just making sure, of course, it's still the student's responsibility and it's part of that experience. Look, this is the job. Imagine it's a job. You're a consultant, and you know how you're going to deal with it. But it's true that it's sort of like a practice round. So it might just need a harsher push on the milestone check-in, and just making sure that they actually, get to the point that they have something for the company, something of value. Really good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
so bring up a good point too, though. We are gonna try to do them face to face, but we're going from Florida to California, which we figured are pretty much different countries anyway. So we're gonna just try to,
right.
And that was the decision of the cohort, basically. We were gonna do that, and they want to give it a shot. So fingers crossed, we'll see.
Right. There were the different options, because originally we were looking at Athens and Dubrovnik. That was the original plan, even pre-COVID plan. But then we were discussing the virtual formats as well. And then we spoke to the cohort, and they preferred the California option. So let's see.
Yeah, which is an interesting point, actually, that they brought up, is that if we're going to do them virtually, we still want to be out of town, because when we're here, we're involved in our day-to-day life, and people expect us to do this. So actually, if we were going to do them virtually, I was going to take them to Orlando or sequester them in a hotel there to do the projects virtually. So that's something else to think about.
Right. Okay. Perfect. So JP, do we have any last questions? Because now we're pretty much done with our part. So if anybody from the audience has any questions, feel free to ask in the Q&A box or raise your hand. We can unmute you as well, and you can ask your question.
Yeah, there was a question that came up a little while ago about essentially assessing the ROI of the projects, and it's probably a good question for Marek to start with. So Marek, I mean, in general, with the project that you did with the Tampa group, how did you guys measure kind of the ROI and the time and the effort that you put into it with the results that you got from the students?
Oh, it's very hard to measure it in ROI metrics.
That was one comment that the person said.
Quality, we got the quality of the consulting, but if we can answer the question, like very soon we will know if there is a real business value, that we have strong position in the U.S. market. Then I can answer that ROI is very, very high. It means the return, all the energy we put in a consulting project is back. But what I have to add, what Amy also said, the energy which came to the company, that we had a touch with the different people from different positions, because there were people from different businesses and also from government sector of the US. That was very valuable. And to be honest, the question is from William. William, sorry, I'm not able to translate it in the real metrics, but the benefits are so high.
Perfect. Thank you, Marek.
And maybe a question for Amy also. Somebody asked, what percentage of, when they're traveling, again, now speaking about normal traveling circumstances, about what percentage of the students' time is spent on project work?
So our trip is 10 days. We do travel like a Friday, have a weekend of cultural events, just to get them sort of situated and immersed a little bit. And then they work typically with the clients on Monday through Wednesday. And then we do business visits on the Thursday and Friday, so that, there is some value. Well, there is a lot of value, right, to talking to businesses that are in similar industries, or something else about, maybe the legal environment, or maybe, something about the economy of the country that we're in, or whatever. So there are some just general business visits that we do on the other days, and then we finish the weekend with some more cultural stuff, and then they go home on Sundays. So So, you know, I think that in terms of timing, it's an important question because Nella and I, you know, talk about this all the time. It's important to get them to do the projects on Monday through Wednesday, because if you let them go let the leash too long, they go run off and they get distracted, and then it's hard to reel them back in. So you got to get that work done first. Work first, and then we play.
And then play.
Yeah, or less stressful work, right? But, you know, I want them to bring their A games to the projects.
Thank you. There were also a couple of questions just about the general organization. And again, so maybe if both Amy and Mark, you can answer this, or Nella, if you can explain a little bit more of a little bit about the formats that we offer, basically. So if we're asking a whole cohort or a whole group to work with one company, or the other format of small teams, can you maybe just talk a little bit about that side of it?
Okay, so maybe let me introduce that a little bit more. So I've talked about the flash consulting projects, which can be those quick, you know, one-day projects done with the company. But outside of that, when we really look at the full scale of the consulting projects, we mainly look at two formats. One of them is a live business case, and the second one is Capstone project. So the live business case actually means that there can be bigger cohort. Really, it can be almost up to 100 students that work on one case with one company. But it's actually done through the educator, which usually is the professor, that then is in the middle of the communication with the company, right? So the professor really works as the filter, and when they have the challenge, they can, usually the professor actually splits them into smaller teams. The teams can focus on different part of the challenge, or it can be run as an internal competition. So actually the teams, you know, all of them have the same challenge, but it really gets filtered, you know, through the professor. So the company doesn't get 100 emails from 100 different people. So that's important for the live business case. So that's a really good one. But the second one is the one actually that we're doing with Amy, and that's the Capstone project. So in our terminology, it's called Capstone project. And it is when there's 2 to 6 students, so I would say 6 students maximum, work on one project with one company. And the educator is really aside, so really just in the beginning of the journey when setting up the assignment and everything. But then when they're introduced to the company, the students work directly with the company. So it's, when you really look at it, it is quite different in terms of the experience. So for the Capstone project, it is more of that consultancy work. They're directly in touch with the company. They are responsible for having the calls with them, get the information. It's really more, and it's super, I would say it's suitable for executive MBA, for sure, for executives. And the live business cases in general, I would say would be the undergrads or the MBAs, where you really, it's okay for you to have just one challenge and present it to more teams and possibly run it as a competition as well. You can imagine, for example, it's good for also less of a complex project, the challenges. So imagine a social media campaign for a specific product. For this one, because it's so creative as well, if you know, there's 10 teams that work on it, and each of them come up with a completely different outcome, completely different suggestion for the campaign, it's so beneficial for the company as well to choose, you know, the best option that would work for them. Plus, you know, you get maybe there's a winning team, so there can be some reward as well. So that is kind of fun. So I would say these are the main 2 formats for the bigger consulting projects. The third one I would mention is the flash consulting project. And then obviously we also can do some sort of a mix and match, and, you know, some hybrids as well, depending what the needs are on the university side and what they would like to see. I don't know if Amy wants to add something to maybe the formats from your side. Just
no, I 100% agree. Actually, we do the case competition with our undergrads, and it works great, right? To have the one project and they're all working on, because the other issue is with undergrads, maybe you can't control the quality as much, right? You're not as confident in the quality. So I'm not sure I want to put a group of students with a company and I'd be like cringing when they're doing their presentation. So the EMBAs, I feel more confident. And I would just say from a professor standpoint, it's much more interesting for me to be, you know, doing projects for 3 or 4 different companies that I get to learn about different industries and different companies. So that is really interesting. And while I'm not involved at all in their meetings or their administration of their project, I'm very busy reading, editing, right? So they turn in something, I read it, I give it back to them, tell them what they need to fix, whatever. So behind the scenes, I'm constantly reading, revising, and getting back to them and making sure that they stay, on target. And I touch in with the companies. Like I said, I don't want to micromanage. This is not my project. They're perfectly capable of doing a good job. I'm just there to make sure the trains are running on time and that the deliverables are of the quality that we're expecting.
Perfect. Thank you. I think we're pretty much running out of time. Jiffy, was there any last question?
We managed to get to all of them. Thank you.
That's wonderful. So mission accomplished. Let me just say a huge thank you to Amy, huge thank you to Marek. We really appreciate you joining us for this discussion and for all your insight and experience and thoughts. So thank you so much again. Have a lovely evening, you too.
No, thank you, Nella. Thank you, ISP.
Thank you so much. And now to our audience, thank you so much for joining us. Huge thank you from me, Nella, also from my co-host, Jeff. We hope to see you again in the future when we do another one, possibly. So enjoy the rest of the day, and we will follow up with the recording of this video for you in case some of your colleagues missed it and you want to rewatch it. So thank you again and have a lovely day.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.